Okay, it started. So I just thought it'd be a good idea to basically review some of the other things that we've talked about and regarding billing, and because we've kind of gone back and forth as to what decisions we've made, and working with the small design group highlighted a lot of different things that we weren't really thinking of, and just kind of going into detail made us rethink some designs, and some of this has stayed the same, some of it has changed, and so I figured might as well just kind of do a refresher on all of it to make sure everybody's on the same page. So to start off, I'm skipping the selector portion because none of that has changed from what we've gone over in the past. So you'll search for your participant and service in the bill selector, which is kind of similar to what we have today, but it'll be a little different. And that hasn't changed from what we've discussed. And then once you click on them, this is the bill detail screen that that's what we're referring to it as. And that's what I mainly cover in this entire agenda. And so when you're in the bill detail screen, if a vendor was looking at it, this is what they would see. And so I'm just showing that we have updated the colors a little bit. They don't really have any different significance to have these different colors, other than that they were, good for the UI, and that they were user-friendly colors that were good with contrast, and blah blah blah, like more user science, or that doesn't really matter to you guys, but the colors are supposed to help indicate which columns are paired up for units and cost per unit. And so that's all there is there. And then we're still going to use the little white boxes that are inside each cell to indicate which cells are supposed to be editable. And so that's similar to what we have today. And then we ended up deciding that these set buttons at the top should only affect the posted units and posted cost per unit columns, and not any other columns. So we renamed them, and rename them from previous calls, but these are completely new features altogether. And so when you put a number in here and then check either the check all to check all the rows, or check individual rows and then click set, then that will set that either the posted units or posted cost per unit in each row. And so that's just a way to kind of save some time when you're posting, and you'll have, or agent users will also have that. And then there's the clear posted values. That's for just clearing data out of rows, because right from the get-go, we will by default put in the posted cost per units. And if a vendor only wants to post half a month, then maybe they'll want to check the second half of the month and click the clear posted values instead of clicking in each cell and backspacing it, which would just be a little bit more tedious. So that's that. And this is going to be basically the look and feel of the bill detail. And so there's most of these details in the top haven't changed from previous calls, but I guess I just wanted to restate that this is the current mock-up that we're going with in design. So if you do see anything that concerns you, worries you, or you'd like to see, please let us know, and we'll try to integrate that in our design. And we're working right now with a small design group on what will all be included in the service event. That's what SE stands for right there, details. And so that's going to include information on the service definition notes, which is like the care plan notes, and the service event notes, which is like template notes. And then we're also going to have information on whether the participant's at risk, and if that's marked in the service event, because that's at the service event level now and not the service staff, which is so at the care plan like it is now. And then there's also going to be information on non-services in there. So that'll show up in a future design call. And then program details is just like it is today. And we have this care setting status that's now a little home icon if you're home, and an X if you're not home. And if you hover over it, we plan to have a tooltip that will show you which home you are, and then if you're not at home, what the care setting status is as well. And this is just an example of what it would look like if you checked all the check boxes and then, you know, put whatever unit you want to enter here and then click set, then it would populate this column. And so just showing you how easy that would be. And then in real life, these would automatically become unchecked again. So that's that. And then after agents post bills, then they'll be available for, vendors post bills and they'll be available to the agencies for review. And that'll be under the not reviewed filter in the bill selector. And so this is again the view after you click on a participant service that's in a batch and start reviewing them, and you'll have these save and exit to just, if you only want to review one bill and you're done, or the save and next that'll keep moving you through the batch. And this is just showing how the approved columns are now what's editable, and so that's why there's the little white boxes, and we're not going to, you know, put anything in these columns by default. Instead, you'll be able to either go into each field and enter them if that's the way you like to do things, or you could use this copy posted to approve button that's only available to agent users that will copy whatever's in the posted row or posted column for each row, and same with posted cost per unit. So that'll populate both of those columns. And that's just an optional thing you can use. If you want to enter each one, that's fine. Or if you want to use that and then go change a couple rows that might be different, you know, that's fine too. And if you have data in there and then you click this again, it's just going to overwrite whatever you have in there. So that's the plan for that. Okay, so now we're going to get into bill edits. So basically, we went over this last time and then changed our minds. So after more discussion, we were going through a lot of examples and basically realized that wasn't quite as intuitive as we had thought it was. Basically, on the previous call, we discussed that in the new way to edit would be that you would actually change the unit value in the original row itself, and then when you saved, a new line and a credit line would be created, but you wouldn't see that until after you saved it. And so it kind of felt, when we were playing around with it, like you were actually just editing the original row itself. It didn't feel like, oh, because you don't see those rows right away. It didn't really seem like what it was. And so then that made it really not user intuitive. And we just really didn't love that part of the design. But also we had to come up with basically an additional way of designing adding bills when bill was zeroed out, because if it was zeroed out, then there was no way to add a line back in. So if, for example, a vendor submitted whatever bill and then you guys didn't approve it, and so then it's basically there'd be zero, and then there'd be no line to edit, I guess, again in the future. And so that process had a little hang up, and some agencies pointed that out to us. And so then we came back on the call last time and had the new plan where we would use the add line, or an add button to add a line back in so you could add units back to that day, which is fine. But then we're basically developing two ways to enter bills, which is just not as time or cost efficient when we could create one way to do it. And so we're going back to the method of just using the plus button to add edits. And so there are some scenarios where this actually saves lines where we don't have to add a credit line, like when we're adding or subtracting units from a day. But there are other scenarios where you'll still need to use the old way of doing things, where you'll click the button and then like enter a credit line and then click the button again and add the new line. And so I basically tried to detail a lot of those examples below so that we could go through it together and make sure that seems like it works for everyone and is going to be okay. So I wasn't really reading this word for word, but I think that's just describing some of the positives and negatives of the old way and new way, and changes like that. So one of the big things though that we do need to talk about is there's a little bit of a logic shift in that when we're adding and subtracting units from a day, and like we're used to always adding credit lines, well, the system adding credit lines for you, but in these cases, you actually don't need to. There's nothing that's going to actually stop you because you can add multiple lines to a day. So you could technically still input edits that way if that's the way you want to do it, but you don't have to, because the way we're going to basically calculate each day is by netting the total and then making sure that the units never are for a day are less than 0. And so what I mean is, where should I start? Let's start with this one. So this is showing the bill detail screen after everything's been approved. So let's say that, you know, they're also authorized 4 units for every single day at $5 a unit. And if the vendor posted that same amount, the agent approved that same amount, so everything's great. You know, there's no variance, you can see blah, blah, blah. So this is like a perfect normal example. So then let's say that the vendor remembered they actually provided 2 additional units on Friday. So they want to go and submit a editor change, whatever, for that day. So the way they would do that is they would click the plus button on this Friday row. And then as soon as they did that, they would see this additional new row. And then these little white boxes would only show up in the posted units and posted cost per unit columns because they're a vendor user. So that's all they can enter at this point. And then you would just enter however many additional units that you provided. So in this example, this means that 6 units were provided for Friday. It doesn't mean that 2 units were provided. And that's literally as soon as they would submit it. I don't know if that's what the next screen is, then this is what you guys would see. And so then it would show up as a not reviewed bill. And then you would have the chance to enter the approved units 2 and 5 if a vendor submitted it. and that's it. There's not going to be a credit line. There's no -4 and then entering 6. But you can do it that way if for some reason you really want to. But this is the new way allows for you to basically save time and save rows, and maybe this logic would be a little bit easier for vendors. When we were discussing this, since then we were talking about how you could add negative units in. So let's say you wanted to change 4 units for the day to 2 units, then most of the agent design group was a little concerned about vendors reducing units. And I guess, well, that's further down, but I just was going to skip ahead and basically say that we're not going to allow vendor users to enter negative units. Only you guys will handle that. And so you don't really have to worry about them getting confused about mathing. Oh, what's this row, or what does this end up totaling up for? Because all the vendors would be doing for edits would be adding units for a given day and submitting that to you guys for approvals. And so that's literally just showing how simple that would look. Another positive to doing it this way is in the old proposition, every single one of these fields would have to be unlocked and editable, because we were saying that they would make the change in the original line. Like for instance, in this case, this 4 would have been editable and they would have changed it to 6 and then clicked save, then saw the credit line and the new line and the original line all stacked up. And that's fine and all, but it wasn't as, we just did not feel like it was as user intuitive for a vendor to go in there and think that when they're on Friday the 3rd and they're changing this posted units to 6, that they're not just changing that exact field right there. It didn't feel like it was going to say, it made it seem like the original value was being changed rather than getting all those extra lines after. So we feel like using the plus button and seeing this difference, and oh, I'm adding 2 units to this row, might be a little bit simpler to grasp. And so that's the plan. Okay, so I'm jumping around a lot, and I want to make sure that this is just explaining how they would do that, and then that they would submit the bill. I want to make sure I'm not skipping anything. Oh, and then just, this is another example for bill edits. You could still use the copy, post it to approve. Would be kind of a silly example since there's only this one edit to approve, but it's there. It'll be available. And then you'll also notice there's a new batch ID for this row because they would have to, it's an edit, so it would have been submitted separate and later on. And so then, like I was saying, we discussed with the small design work group that vendor users shouldn't be able to reduce the number of units. And so we were going to restrict that. That's not something that like we need to do. It's not a CIM limitation. It's more just, we're trying to follow your lead. So if anyone disagrees with that, I guess let us know, because we can talk about that a little bit more. I think they're worried that they could mess stuff up if they entered negative values. And so then another thing to mention is if we disallow vendors to enter negative values for the posted units, then that means they won't be able to change the custom service if that ever needs to be updated, or the cost per unit, because changing those would require adding a negative credit line first and then adding a new line, because that's just going to make a lot more sense, so that you're not making what the new rate is really confusing by, doing some interesting math with adding negative units. So does anyone disagree and think we need to allow vendors to add negative unit values?
Hey, Emily, can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Cindy from Region 8. I'm just trying to get into other people's heads. I don't agree or disagree. My head just hurts. I'm thinking about some of our own providers, and I just want to put out an example of what we do is we actually have a form that we have today. Providers submit to make changes, and so we have basically a calendar, and they're able to put positive and negatives across the board. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that in that scenario moving forward, I would be telling my providers that yes, they could put all the positives on this screen here, but all the negatives, they would have to do a different process. And was that discussed and weighed against the concern about negatives? Because I just think to myself, either way, it's going to be confusing for providers, because we're going to have a new process. And I share the concern from an OIG perspective, but I also know at the end of the day, it's up to all of the agents to approve or disapprove. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I'm not for or against. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I'm glad you are, because we don't want to limit them if it's going to end up just creating more pain, because it's definitely not something that CIM has a preference on. It's just, we want to do whatever the group majority wants to do. Because we'll still have validation that would disallow them for, in this case, if they entered -5 units, they couldn't ever have a total that was less than 0 for the day. And that's going to apply to you guys and vendor users. So,
does anyone want to weigh in on that? We're asking them to do 2 procedures, and is that more or less confusing than today? They do 1 procedure, at least where I sit in my agency. I don't know what everybody else's procedures are at their own agencies. And so that's what I'm trying to uncover. If today you have some sort of process for positive lines versus negative lines, I just like to try and understand how you do things.
Does anyone from the small design group that didn't want vendors to enter negative values care to share why or opinion?
This is Stacy at Senior Resources. Excuse me. I think we, in the small group, had really been concentrating or focusing on the issues with, possibly having the OIG reporting procedures or how staff handles that internally be a little bit different within each agency, and that could probably cause some issues.
Thank you.
Does everyone at all the waiver agencies, when you receive some sort of correction today, do you make it mandatory within your process to have an explanation as to why they're either asking for more reimbursement or asking for reimbursement to be taken back because they made a negative mistake, if you will?
Our procedures for when the provider has made some kind of error that results in a recoupment where they're self-reporting, we ask our providers to utilize VendorView and send in vendor messages stating that there was a billing issue and document everything that, we need the details on there. And we use that for processing. And then we also put it in our documentation for our OIG process. Did that answer your question, Cindy?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. I'm wondering, Emily, is there a limitation to the number of characters that can be added to a vendor note in vendor billing? It would be
pretty huge, I think.
okay. I mean, it would be great to have, personally, my perspective, to have those notes in vendor billing versus vendor view. Just the people working in vendor billing at the time would have, access to that information without having to go someplace else.
Sorry, so you want to see vendor view?
I'm wondering if an
Messages.
edit is, if, again, I'm just having a discussion here. If the vendor note column was required whenever an edit was made, would that help people at all? Regardless of whether we do the positive or the negative, I just feel that there needs to be a note about why someone's doing something, and certainly adding a line asking for more money is asking for more money, but I would certainly like to know, well, why wasn't it right in the first time? Is it a missing timesheet? Is it just an error? Because that information certainly could prompt us to ask more questions of the provider. So I would like to make that be a required field, regardless of positive or negative.
We can definitely do that. Do others agree?
I like that idea.
Can anyone else chime in if they agree or not?
Yeah, this is Sonia from Region 5. I do like the idea. If they're able to add lines like this, then yes, we would want to know why they're doing it. Currently, we also use vendor view for them to make the request, like, hey, we need additional time on this day or that day, or we canceled this shift or that shift, and they tell us why. So if that's going to kind of go away and they can do this on their own, we will need to know why.
Yeah, and you can control, I guess, who does this if it's a problem and you don't want your vendor users to be adding edits. That can be at an agency basis, I think, of how you guys do your processes. But yeah, they will be able to add lines if they want. And so yeah, we're just trying to decide if it's just positive values, just adding, or if they're able to take it away. And so if requiring a note helps add to that clarification, then that's great. We can easily do that, but we'll also still have vendor view messages and a lot more elaborate message system with 4.1 that they can still use for more tricky situations to kind of work through things with you guys.
Yeah, this is John from Region 4. It's in my opinion that having if the note field is required, I wouldn't be for that, but I don't mind the idea of having why are you adding these units now, type of thing. And then I'm sorry I was late to the meeting today. I don't know if we talked about giving vendors the ability to subtract time from this. I'm not for that idea.
Thanks, John. Did you say you're not for requiring the note field as well, or you were?
I don't mind having the note field. It's in my opinion that as long as the number of units are at or below what the authorized care plan was for, I don't care what their reason is for it. We have timelines put in place that they can submit their invoices, and as long as they're within that period, I'm okay with it. So to have a note field would be nice to say, oh, this person handed in our timesheet late, but to require it, I don't think that's, in my opinion, I don't think that's very helpful information currently, but I could be proven wrong.
I guess, John, this is Cindy. The only reason I suggested it to be a required field is to enable vendors to not have to think about whether they need to add something or not. I'm exploring why we couldn't have negatives on there. And I know it's because of OIG, and I'm, the biggest OIG fan of that as well. I just know today our providers submit a form to us with positive and requests across the board. And all I see in moving to 4.0 is they're going to be doing that same thing for us, only more automated for them. And we still have the opportunity to approve or deny. And so I'm just exploring, I'm trying to figure out in my head without ever having done this, are we making it more difficult for our providers to have two processes? Because right now we just have one process to submit corrections. And now I'm asking our providers to come up with two processes. One of it's automatic and one of it's not. And so just having that conversation with all of you to see where your head's at. That's all.
So that's why my opinion is, as long as they're so if I or anyone data staff were to look at a care plan, and if they didn't have the authorized units in place, me or my team would, we would deny units. If a vendor wants to, add units to a particular day or series of days, it would still have to be approved by our care managers in order for that to happen. So this, in my opinion, this isn't the place to ask for overages, because the people that can approve those overages aren't part of this process. And so and then with negatives, why I don't feel that's necessary is that there may be more to the process. There may be a discussion that needs to be had for why a negative takes place, and I think having it here is too late in the series of things to have this be where a vendor should be. This shouldn't be the first time a vendor wants to communicate a negation of units of from a previous build invoice.
Thanks for your feedback, John. That's really
Yeah.
great. I mean, I would like to see all additions go through our supports coordinator process, and they don't.
Yeah.
So,
I do think that there's room in this Compass build for I think that where we at Region 4 have struggles, it's notices of non-services, it's request for overages, it's those kind of communications where a care plan is being changed, where I think we face our we being data and our support coordinator staff face our biggest challenges with these care plans. And if we had a way within this new Compass build to automate those or to more automate those care plan changes, I think that's the right place to do it. I don't think that at the billing time is the right time to do that. So yeah, I'm with you, Cindy, on that we want to create as few processes as we can for our vendors. But on the billing side of things, again, like I've said, I don't want to harp on the same point, but I don't think billing's the right time to discuss care plan changes.
yeah, I hear you. I'm at that stage where what you've proposed is great for 4.0 or 4.1, and maybe we all can just, once we start using it and down the road, come up with something that's more robust that captures what's been discussed here in a more automated way.
Yeah. Because I mean, currently with Region 4, we're using vendor messaging for vendors to tell us about notice of non-services. And sometimes those it's possible in this case where a vendor might be, oh, we actually didn't provide this service on this date, and so they might want to try to transmit those negatives here. Vendor view message is not the perfect place for a process like or a conversation like a notice of non-service to take place. And so I think there's conversation to be had about where the best way to start those conversations and have a record of those conversations can be.
Emily, I would still be a proponent of having a message be required in that field so that there's some, I don't know, some thought process. I'm just putting it out there for a vote. I mean, I won't pursue the negative because I understand the majority of people are concerned about it, and I share it. I'm just going to be working on what our process of communication is to our vendors moving forward. But I wonder if there's support for the edit having something in the vendor note as a requirement.
I mean, it's not a bad idea to have it required, because that could act as a deterrent for, this is why you want to make sure all your timesheets are submitted before you submit a batch. So to that end, it's a good solution. So.
Okay. Well, unless I hear a lot of disagreeing, maybe we'll just go forward with that unless we want to do a vote. I don't know. What do you think, Melissa?
Yeah, I'd like to hear if anybody objects to that for sure. And I guess we also need to really define what that means. Is it that they add a day, add a line to a day that has a batch already?
You mean like just that it would be edits, not additional
Yeah.
days? Yeah, I think that's what we're saying, right? That it would, so we didn't get to that point yet, but you'll be able to post multiple lines right from the get-go without having to make edits by using this plus button as well. But I think that what Cindy, and correct me if I'm wrong, was saying is that we could require a vendor note when vendors post additional lines that are edits, as in, yes, the original bill has already been submitted and approved and verified, et cetera, and belongs to a batch and yada, 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 like at that point. And then I think she didn't say, I heard John say that, oh, if it's, under this amount of authorized units, maybe they only posted 2 to begin with, and now they're adding 2, so it still meets the authorized units, that then you really don't care. But I think we were saying that in any case, even if it is less than or equal to the authorized units, or it's more than whatever, that any time it was an edit, that we would require a vendor note. That's what we're talking about.
So this is Cindy. I would agree with John's statement. I don't really care if they're submitting a request for additional units and they're still under the authorized. Like, again, I don't need to know that they made a mistake. It's when they're going above and beyond. But for purposes of, what's easiest and most cost effective for CIM to put that requirement in any fashion, I'm all about saving us dollars. So I'm not trying to make it complicated. So.
Right.
Yeah. I would say that with with care plans that have frequency in days, it might be difficult, Emily, to, for a day that might have services, because what they post on a Friday might not be the actual, well, I guess you could probably formulate it so that way it looks that there's 3 days that have 4 units, up to 4 units on each one. It could do that. But
I feel like I know where you're going with it, how to know that that's an edit at that point, after you've already posted to 3 days, that if,
yeah,
like how you,
I would say that if there's a way to, I actually am starting to not mind the message so much as I think about it. But definitely, like what kind of Cindy was getting at, is that if they've already maximized their units within the week, then I'd love it to, if it could either trigger a message, stating that, you don't have any more units to give, contact support coordinator.
well, Melissa, would we want to do like a warning when you go over the authorized units for posted? Because variance compares approved and authorized. We don't have any comparison of posted and authorized in the screen right now. I mean, I'm sure we have certain reports. I don't know our reports very well.
Well, posted, in my opinion, isn't posted doesn't only needs to be considered when, once there's approved, then you want to do what's been approved minus the authorized. And then if you're trying to post beyond the authorized, considering the approved. But if you want to submit 60 units where you only have 28, a message could be nice for that, or not let them. But
This is Stacy. I like the idea of having a warning message if they're going over the authorized, whether it's in the original posting process or whether they're going in and trying to post additional units against a month of service. I think that would be great.
yeah.
Okay, so I was saying posted, I think it's because to me that means if total posted at any point, whether it's original or an edit, is going to be more than total authorized, and that's an easy way. But we could also probably do that at the weekly level. I mean, it just depends on the service event type. You could do daily for date, time, and date anytime. And you could look at it weekly and monthly for the other two types, right?
Oof, I don't want to do that. That's too complicated. I think we just look at the totals. I think you want to look at the totals though, including the prior and next calendar month.
Do you?
Yeah, you need to look at the full, the first service week and the last service week of a billing month.
Yeah, because
and
they
that
could
includes-
easily skip the first 3 days like in this one and post them on Wednesday, Thursday, and it'd be fine.
I think that can sometimes be confusing even to our staff when we pull in the week, the last week of the prior month. I think that's something that maybe we should discuss a little further in the small design group. I mean, there's many times when it appears when we're reviewing a bill posted, the variance is showing a negative, but when you actually go through and look and view everything based on how things were scheduled, and maybe they have days and times may vary, technically they're not over their authorization. So I think that might be something we need to talk about a little further.
Okay. Yeah, and I can see how the next month would be worrisome too, because if you include that on the first time they bill, you know, then that's going to always probably be it won't represent it because they haven't posted it yet to know that the posted against authorized yet. You know what I mean? But edits, it would matter if they're going backward in time.
Yeah.
So yeah, we probably do need to fine tune that a little.
Okay.
I think that would be helpful and probably prevent the vendors from making mistakes in the first place.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm trying to think more about what we can talk about that later on, but yeah, including the previous and future, because at some point, yeah, there's just always going to be scenarios then that it doesn't help with. But if you just did the actual month, you could at least be sure that they're not posting more than what's authorized for that month that you're looking at, which you could miss out on. It goes both ways for, yeah, what you could.
Right.
So I just don't really know what the right answer is. Okay. Well, let's move on for now. It sounds like we've some more things to kind of circle back to. So I think we agree though that for now, at least with 4.1, that we're gonna go with only allowing positive values for vendor users. And so they won't be able to do the more tricky changes that would include the custom service changes and cost per unit, because they would require adding a credit line, which would require negative units to be entered. So this is just an example of what an agent user would need to do if the vendor did contact you and asked you to reduce the units for a day. You just pull up the participant service in the bill selector, and then once you're looking at the bill detail, this is what it would look like. You would click this little plus button and get the new line, and then since you're an agent user, you would be entering the posted and approved values at the same time. And there shouldn't be a batch ID in this line. That's a mistake in the mockup. But you would enter whatever applies. And so let's say here you're changing the units from 4 to 2. So that's how you would do it. And so 4 plus -2 equals out to 2. And you just click save and exit if you want to be done, or save and next if you have more to review. And then you can see, oops, the variance is wrong too. Because now 2 units haven't, so it should be black and not negative. So that's this is all the opposite. Whoops. Because 2 units have happened that less versus more, so these totals would reflect it as well, but you just have to ignore the fact that I wasn't paying attention when I made this, I guess. And then updating cost per unit. So this would be where you would have to add the credit line. So same thing, find the participant unit or participant service that you need to change by searching in the bill selector. Open up this bill detail, click the plus button. And again, I have so many mistakes in these. The plus button would only show up on the original line. And so for these additional 2 Friday lines, you wouldn't have see the add line button, so that we could know we'd always be associating these additional edits with the original line. But anyways, you would enter -4 to basically cancel out credit, the first bill. And then for the new line, and then you could change the cost. And if you were changing the units too, you could obviously do that at the same time. I just was giving a simple example of just changing cost per unit. And so we were talking about this, and we discussed that it would make sense to always add a credit line first, because if you try to do some, like, technically you could just add additional units for a smaller cost and change the total, I guess, cost per unit for that day in that way. And we're not going to disallow you from doing that, but it's just kind of a kooky way to do it and makes for a more difficult audit trail. So we suggest that this is the way that you would change things. And same with a custom service. So now that custom services will be in here as well, since you could technically have different ones, like maybe they're receiving Ensure and Boost or Ensure Plus or whatever, and you've selected the wrong custom service on a day, then you could go in here, add a credit line for the one you don't want anymore, and then add a new line for whatever the custom service is that you actually wanted. And so then this drop down would be populated with all the applicable custom services that match, the currently selected service vendor and date range that you have set up in the rates. And so that's how that would work. Are there any questions on this stuff? I don't want to just keep cruising through.
How are these changes then, what's the output of it? So we have something to submit to fiscal. What does that look like? Or have we not gotten that far yet?
What do you mean, like reporting?
Yeah. So currently what we do is with bill edit, we provide, we do the verification in MISIS. And so we have a credit line to provide to our fiscal staff. What will we have in these instances that would show that we removed? Well, in this case, there's no price difference, so that's not that big of a deal. But let's say we did, let's say Ensure Plus was 50 cents more, or rather, I guess, let's say 50 cents less. What reports would we have to show that on this day this amount was changed?
Well, so you were asking about, we'll still have verification in this process. Even when you guys are putting edits in, you would still have to verify them. And then just what you see now is what you would see here as form of, I guess, an audit trail. But then I don't know our reports really well and what we,
Okay.
I don't.
Would we be able to obtain today? I know the MISIS bill posting report, and then obviously the expenditure report.
Yes, those are planned. We just haven't gotten to designing them yet to know what's really needed.
Okay, so there would be an actual report that would show basically this transaction as 2 lines,
Yes.
2 different lines, because we would need that for OIG reporting purposes, just to wrap our head around what's taking place.
Yes, that's the plan. As for the difference in price John was talking about, the authorized is going to be there for it, this one, in this case, no, Ensure Plus, the authorized wouldn't show up because it's not authorized. So, you would have to know that they picked something different than was authorized. Well, wait, can they do that? I'm not sure this is a good example.
Yeah.
I don't think they would see in the list a custom service that wasn't authorized.
But what if you had Insure Plus later on in the month?
Yes,
It's
yes, yes. Okay.
That's what,
So you would have Insure Plus somewhere in there that would be in the like gray line that you would see it. And that authorized would show the right cost per unit that was authorized. So, and then your variance, of course, would reflect that there's a price difference in that. But yeah. So we weren't planning on any reporting. I mean, this is kind of how it is now. If they change the price on you, you just have to catch it by looking at the authorized. There's nothing different, reporting wise that we have. I mean, you might have developed
Yeah.
something. If you did, we aren't aware of it.
Well, I was just wondering what Compass 4.0, like similar to today's variance, the variance report in MISIS, will something like that be available that would show that on this day I removed the
Oh, yeah.
insured and added the insured plus?
Yeah, the variance report is one that's planned to be written. We just haven't, gotten that far for design part of that. But it was part of helping with the verification process too.
Yeah. Okay.
We're gonna get how it works first, then we can figure out how to report it.
sorry, one second, I'm making a note. And then here's an example of how you would zero out a day, which is just really self-explanatory. Just add a credit line for that day. That's it. Click save. So these are some of the additional details that were on the previous call, but I updated them to make sure they still matched with this new process. And then I kind of wanted to leave them on here to basically ensure that, oh yeah, these things are still the same as they were. So like all the bill lines will be locked after verification for you guys, and then all the bill lines will look locked to vendor users after approval. And at that point, you'll always still be able to add notes at any point, but you'll also be able to, that's when you would use the plus button to make edits and never be changing the original lines. And then we planned on leaving the authorized units and cost per units empty for the credit lines because we wanted to make it look like, more was authorized. And the batch ID would be blank when a vendor or agent is adding edits because it wouldn't be submitted at that point yet. And then, agent users that are posting and approving bills and edits at the same time will be prompted to enter an invoice number. So that's nothing's different with any of those processes. And then I just kind of detailed that explain the difference of when you would be able to add just an additional line without needing a credit line, or examples of when you would need to do both. I didn't put an example of updating approved values on here, but it's the same as like changing the cost per unit example where you would first have to credit out whatever you originally had and then do a new line, and then you could change whatever you approved it at if you'd already verified. But if you hadn't verified, then you could just change the approved values right in the grid and save. So are there any more comments or questions, concerns about these processes before we move on again? Oops. Okay. So now we kind of talked about this earlier, but another thing that we discussed with the small work group is that we should actually just allow these adding new lines right from the get-go when you're originally posting, and not limit it to just edits, because we were given examples where sometimes the first unit of the day has a higher rate than the rest of the units, or this might be helpful when entering premium pay if you don't have that already integrated in your vendor rates. And so that this is probably not a good, I didn't think out an example because I just don't really know really good examples, but this would be what it looks like if you're working through entering your posted units. And so I guess I don't have a 4 in there yet, but you could just put one line in for one, and that's a higher rate, and then our cost per unit, so whatever rate I say, and then maybe the rest of the units are at this lower rate. I'm just trying to demonstrate that this would be allowed during the original post, and those wouldn't be seen as edits, just that's how you're posting your bills. And so that's something that vendors and you guys could do, and you would approve it just the same, but you would have 2 lines basically to approve. And we would just calculate the totals at the top the same way that we always do. So you would still be able to easily track if, for some reason they're trying to post more than they should be allowed to, or approve, or if the cost per unit is a lot more, because in this example, it looks like they still were only authorized 5, and maybe your rate in general would be higher in these cases. And then it's like, again, I'm saying this example isn't really well thought out, but like whatever your actual rate is set up originally, maybe it's like $7, and then they post at the higher rate for the first unit and change it to a lower rate for the additional unit, for the other units. And so however you guys set this up is up to you, just putting it out there that it's possible. Are there any questions about that? And then weekly and monthly anytime bills, we've never really given a mock-up of how that would look like either. And so we discussed how that would look. And just a reminder, the weekly and monthly anytime service events are the ones that they allow you to designate like a total number of units that can be delivered at any point in the week or any point in the month. And it's our new way of basically dates and times may vary. And you can also have the optional ability to enter frequency. And so that's going to be new fields on the service event that are like number of days and units per day. And so if you had a weekly anytime event, that could be something that maybe you're supposed to go out 3 times, and every time they get 4 units of whatever service, then you could enter that information in the frequency area, and then you would have the total units in the unit field. And so it'd be like 15 units total at $5 a unit, and then the frequency area would say number of days 3, and then units per day 5, and then that would be 5 units every day or something like that. That's just an example. And so in that example, this is what you would see in billing, is if you did a weekly anytime event line that would show up at the end of each week, and this is a scroll, and so you can see it through the whole month at the end after every Saturday, and then you'd see whatever total units that you had authorized and the cost per unit. And then if you hovered over this area, then we would show you the frequency if it was entered. And so that's my example of, oh, this happens 3 days a week and 5 units every day. So then you know that what you should be seeing when you're posting or approving is 3 different days in that week that have had 5 units posted. And so that's just my little example. But that could look like a lot of different things. And otherwise, they'll basically look the same. And same with monthly anytime. You'd have to scroll all the way to the bottom. So that's what I've done here. Is the bottom of the month, you'd see a monthly anytime line with the total units and cost per unit, and then you'd allocate them to every day that the service was actually delivered. And that's how this would work. So are there any questions on monthly anytime and weekly anytime service events and how that looks in billing.
Emily, this is John in Region 4. If they had a scheduled exception to one of those weeks, would that days per week and the units per day, would that adjust to fit if they added a fourth day in there?
I don't think we would change the frequency, but we just change the overall, the authorized units would change.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't think we can guess what the change would be to the frequency. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can see that information. You could click on the SE details and see the non-service info and then see that the authorized amount was less
Mhm.
as well. Is that sufficient?
I think so, but I fear not. My only thought would be if I was looking at this and we had a request for a fourth day in that first week of April, we might see that the days per week. But I guess would the units go in authorized there if I were to add a day in that time?
If you guys added another, if it was an increase and you had to add basically another service event to that day to because scheduled exceptions are different. So it just depends how you do it. You could add a service event to that actual date and then you'd see it show up on here because it would still be in the same service.
Yep.
And that's all combined, whatever. Or you could change this from 15 to 20 with an exception, like you're saying. And then I just wonder, we could maybe look at updating the frequency for the exception, actually, now that I think about it. Because that's its own, Mel, couldn't we actually do that for an exception because it's its own record? So just in that week, it would show a different frequency. So like pretend you had a weekly anytime service event that was set up for 15 units. If they went and clicked on this one random week or whatever, changed the units to 20 and updated the days per week to 4, then saved it, that's its own record because it's now an exception. And if you hovered over this, it could say 4 versus if you hovered over the following weeks, it would still say 3, right? Couldn't we do that actually?
Yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it would,
Okay.
because it would override that whole weekly anytime amount, right? I mean, the units
Yeah,
on per
right.
unit could change.
And so then
Okay.
20, yeah. So then that does cover the frequency changes.
Okay. Would that show up as a scheduled exception or an edit, or would that just?
It would just look like it does right now. It wouldn't look
Okay.
anything weird.
In here, I mean, in like the other side of the house, it'll look similar to how it does today.
Okay.
Or,
In the
you know,
calendar,
like
It
yeah.
would it'd be styled different because it was an exception, but
Okay. Okay.
okay. Sorry, I was writing a note to look at that. Okay, so that's all we had for today. Unless anyone else has anything else they want to talk about.
I have an announcement to make too. So we just received the CTS training recording this morning, as all of you did. We weren't invited to the original one, and they've since apologized for that oversight. In watching that recording this morning, I've already identified 2 issues that we need to fix in our Nifty Claim software that we weren't aware of. I'm about to send everybody an announcement, but we've already integrated the Nifty Claims into our hotfix release that's scheduled to go out tomorrow night. So we are going to delay that release 2 weeks to October 7th so that we can get these changes made, rather than having another release after this one that's just as silly and more effort on all our parts. So I just want to let you guys know that we are going to delay it for those 2 weeks just to make sure we can get these changes in. I've also actually got an outstanding question to the state as a result too. But hopefully we'll get back timely to deal with any issues that could arise from it. Hopefully it's fine already, but anyway, so there'll be more details in the email announcement about it. But I just want to let you guys give you guys a heads up since we have you on the call.
Will it just be a module within MISIS existing, or is it, I wasn't sure with some of the language, if it was going to be a new module or whatever within MISIS, or it's going to be a companion software. It's all going to still be within MISIS, correct?
It's actually the same process that TCM Claims uses.
Okay.
So we're essentially reusing that same thing, and TCM and Nifty will go together if they're there.
Okay.
So it's literally the same process, the same things you're used to. It's not going to be too much different. The only difference really is on the upfront side, that you need to do the prior authorization requests and put that in the system before the claims can go for everything but T1016, which we just found about that like a couple weeks ago too, that they changed on us. So we got that in there, but now there's 2 more things. It's like, geez Louise. So it's very frustrating on our part, because we thought this was all nailed down and then it wasn't, and they forgot to tell us. So, it's going to be very, very much the same. We're also scheduling a Nifty Claims training here too soon, because there was a lot of confusion from that training, and now I understand why, having watched it. So that we can kind of go over, exactly what you need to do. But setup is still the same as what we sent out in that Nifty Claims information document to get, all your TNs enrolled and your agency enrolled, and, put in care plans and things under the 112 starting 10/1, etc. Oh, and then the other thing I didn't mention, we are going to load the ICD-10 codes before 10/1, so you'll be able to still use those ahead of time. That's separate from a release. Technically, we were just going to do it at the same time, but we'll do that because obviously 10/7 will be a little late for that, but they'll be there. And then we'll send out the invalid stuff, after the 1st as well, so that people can fix their next assessments. Maybe possibly their Nifty CTAs too, because now that's in play for claims purposes. So anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that October 7th is going to be the new release date. Any other questions for us about this or the release?
I just wanted to say thanks, Melissa, for all your work on the Nifty Claims. I think
You're-
you're helping us a lot.
You're welcome. Well, looking at that training, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of glad you saw it just to see how much work is involved in creating claims. I looked at us like, yeah, see, we're taking care of all that. But yeah, it's not fun, that's for sure. Anyway, okay, thank you for saying that, Cindy. And let us know if any questions come up in the meantime. I'm more than happy to help.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.